It is very important for us to have a good understanding of what you have learned and how you plan to use this information. Once again, thank you for joining us. I'll now turn it over to Jenny Sladen, Director of National Initiative, to get started.
Thank you, Abby. And thank you to all of you for joining us today for our webinar. We use technology every day to pay our bills, to keep in touch with friends and families, to receive health care and medical support, and to get to and from school, work, and other activities in the community. Making sure that people with disabilities have skills and support to access technology is an important part of making a future plan. Today's webinar, Planning for and Using Technology Across a Lifespan, will review the steps that people with disabilities and their families can take to evaluate how to use technology to support and advance a person's goals. We'll provide tips and resources to find technology that fits the person's needs and explore ways that people with IDD and their families can build skills to use different technology. We are so blessed today to have two speakers to join us and share their knowledge. Our first speaker, Katie Lernahan-Schmid, is the Manager of Educational and Tech Initiatives here at the ARC. Her work helps people with disabilities improve their digital literacy skills in order to better use and access technology. Prior to working here at the ARC, Katie was a special education teacher and later an assistive technology resource professional. Our second speaker today is Daphne Stephan from the ARC Baltimore. Daphne is the Director of Assistive Technology and Information Systems. In 2012, she launched an assistive technology program with the vision of enhancing opportunities for people with IDD to improve their lives through the use of technology. This program provides increased awareness, access, and support to people with IDD and their families. Thank you, Katie and Daphne, for joining us today and sharing your expertise on this subject. If you are interested in more about the presenters, you can find a longer bios in the webinar registration. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Katie and Daphne to share with us their knowledge and presentation today.
Hi, everyone. This is Katie Lernahan-Schmid speaking. Happy Tuesday. Thanks for joining today. I will be presenting the first portion of this webinar on technology across the lifespan before passing the second portion off to Daphne. So let's go ahead and get started. So I want to quickly just touch upon some of the main objectives that we're going to review today. The first is just going to give a basic understanding of the history and the different types of assistive technology that exist. We're going to talk a little bit about why it is important to plan for technology across a lifetime. We will review the steps that people and their families should take to evaluate any needs that a person has that can be assisted by technology. And we're going to describe ways that people with IDD and their families can work to make sure that people are building their technology skills throughout their lifetime. Obviously, we're going to touch upon other things, but these are the main objectives for our webinar today. So to start, let's look at a definition of assistive technology. The term in general can mean any item, piece of equipment, or product system. So when you read this definition, and I'll let you guys all read it as you know, it's on your screen, but when you read this definition, it really means assistive technology can be anything. And that's really important to think about as we move through this webinar, because oftentimes people do immediately hear assistive technology and their head goes straight to the technology piece. And that's not always the case. Assistive technology can truly be any item or equipment or device that helps a person accomplish a goal. But we all thought it started with iPads. No way. When I was an educator, oftentimes I was speaking with parents and families and colleagues, and everybody always said, oh, you know, I thought assistive technology was just iPads or a computer. And assistive technology most certainly did not start with iPads. So let's take a quick look at the history of assistive technology. So it started as early as the 1800s. We could have gone way back, and I know that there's actually some history that touches upon it beginning even earlier than the 1800s, but I wasn't going to take you too far. So the first one I've got up here is just an ear trumpet. And let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I also have, from the early 1900s, a Braille embosser, guide dogs. We have a text telephone from the 1960s, so you can see that as we're moving through history here, we're starting to begin to get a little bit techy, more tech-focused as far as the electronic components. In the 1980s came ZoomText, and ZoomText is a software that helps individuals with visual impairments zoom closer into their computer, and it allows for them better accessibility while interacting with a computer screen. When we move into the 1990s, we see that smart boards were introduced into classrooms. And this allowed for students with all types of different needs to better access education through kinesthetic approaches and visual approaches. And we also have Drag and Dictate. Those of you that are familiar with different assistive technology tools for speech recognition, Drag and Dictate is one of the leading products for individuals who might have challenges typing on a keyboard to use to type on a computer. So they use you can use your voice when using Drag and Dictate to type words on your computer. And you'll see we're going to touch upon how some of these technologies that we're looking at right now that have impacted the history of assistive tech are now incorporated into tools that we use every single day. Now we have the 2000s to the present day. And as we're looking at these devices, you can see that a lot of these devices are what can be considered fairly high tech. We've got our iPad, we've got our Apple Watch, and we also have newer pieces of technology, the Google Home and the Alexa Amazon Echo right up there. What's interesting is these pieces of technology can be life-changing for individuals with disabilities, but we're using it every day, and it's also helping our lives, you know, in all kinds of different ways, make our lives a little bit easier. So again, we're going to talk a little bit more about what the term for that means in a few moments. So assistive technology can come in many forms, as you just saw. Much of what the general population uses today could be defined as assistive technology in the past. So some examples of that include Siri on an iPhone, text dictation on any smartphone. So by text dictation, I mean when I send a text, oftentimes on smartphones nowadays, you can select a setting or a button that allows for you to speak your words, and it will type out those words for you. That originally started off as assistive technology, and now it's being incorporated into technologies today because it makes everybody's life easier. This is called universal design. It also goes further back to things such as curve cuts. So when curve cuts were initiated, it was generally for people who used wheelchairs as their transportation mode. And everybody saw curve cuts as something that actually is beneficial for most people, whether you have a cart that you're pushing, whether you have a child in a stroller. Another example of universal design that's not necessarily related to smartphones and tablets is level doorknobs. So in the past, doorknobs, you know, looked circular, and you'd have to use your hand in the center of your palm to turn that doorknob. And slowly they moved into the level doorknobs because individuals with disabilities needed to be able to access physical spaces. And then people realize that actually these doorknobs work better for everyone because I can use my elbow when I'm carrying things to open a space. It's just in general an easier knob to use. A couple other just common examples that people might recognize as universal design. Spell check is a commonly referred to tool that began as an assistive technology. Screen readers, so the ability for me to have text read over my computer, maybe not computer screen, but it could be a tablet as well. But those are just some examples of universal design. So truly, universal design is all around you. So I kind of challenge everybody here listening to think about things that you use every day that may have started off as an assistive technology. So when speaking about the history of assistive technology, I definitely want to dig into the range of assistive technology products. And there really are three main categories of assistive technology products. We have high-tech, mid-tech, and low-tech. So I'm going to walk you all through each of those categories so you have a better understanding of what those look like. So the first one is low-tech. Oftentimes when I was providing direct support services as an assistive technology professional, I would look at low-tech before looking at high-tech, because sometimes you can help an individual meet their goal, and it doesn't always require the tool with all the bells and whistles. And people don't always look at Post-it notes or pencil grips or graphic design or graphic organizers as assistive technology, but they are, because you're helping an individual meet a goal. So again, we go back to what I mentioned at the start of this presentation, which is that anything can be a piece of assistive technology if it's helping an individual meet a goal. So in this case, it's just items that many of you have access to, I'm sure, on a daily basis. And if something low-tech is helping an individual meet their goal, then this is just as good as any other device that would be categorized as high-tech. So as far as mid-tech goes, these are going to be the tools that I feel like complement a higher tech tool. So you might have a keyboard. That's going to be considered something that's mid-tech. That's going to be a hardware device that you would use alongside a computer. You might have something like audiobooks. You might have word prediction software. So these are things that are still, they're a little bit more than just Post-it notes, color coding, but they're not necessarily a full-blown computer system. And these can be used for a variety of different goals, and we will be touching upon goals later on in the presentation and how and what needs to be considered when looking at an individual's needs and deciding on what type of tool might help that individual meet their needs. So finally, we have our high-tech, and as you would expect, we have our tablets, our computers, our smart home devices all here, some of our higher-end voice recognition and magnification softwares, and things like that. So this is going to be the high-tech realm in the range of the assistive technology products. So now that we've kind of looked at the history of assistive tech, we've looked at the range of products that are out there, just so we have an understanding that there is a large range. Let's talk a little bit about what it looks like when considering these types of technologies across the lifespan. So when we're just thinking of the basic stages of an individual's life, we think of, a child, we think of an adolescent, a young adult, a middle-aged, and a senior individual. And when we're thinking about these different stages, we definitely need to consider the tool that I might be using and what particular age that tool is going to be most helpful for me and how that might shift as I'm aging. May there need to be changes that I have to consider, or is it a tool that I can use throughout my entire life? And there's no real right or wrong answer here. It's just absolutely something that needs to be considered. And in conjunction with the age ranges, definitely the different domains of their life need to be considered. So how is this tool going to be used to help the individual meet their goals? Is it for organizational skills? Is it for daily living skills, safety, maybe more academic-focused skills, mobility, communication? So really, I try to take age, product, and goal that the individual have in mind when considering what tools might need to be looked at through the lifespan. And as I said, you know, when we're thinking about the age ranges, I wanted just to throw this visual out there, especially because, you know, on the left we have a young girl, and on the right we have a young man, and you'd imagine that the tools that may address these individuals' needs at different parts of their lifetime are likely going to be different. And it might not just be because the goals are different and the age is different, but you also think about physically how these individuals are different. So if it's a tool that I might be carrying with me often, you have to think about, you know, fine motor movements, gross motor movements, and how those tools will interact with the individual to help them reach that goal. So as we're continuing to look at technology across the lifespan, definitely the main questions that I would say that need to be asked and discussed with the individual with IDD is, what do they want to accomplish? Is there something that they want to do? Is there an area in their life that they'd like to gain some more independence? And ultimately, is there something out there that can help you achieve a goal? And truly, you know, it's easier than it looks just to answer those three questions. And as I've mentioned, Daphne will definitely be touching upon what the process looks like to evaluate assistive technology and take those things into consideration. But definitely staying goal-focused when looking at assistive technologies is the biggest priority. So finally, as we're looking at planning assistive technology across the lifespan, you know, you really want to consider what really needs to be done in order for this individual to live the most independent life possible, particularly in the community. So in order to do that, you definitely want to begin by identifying opportunities for independence and what the barriers and challenges may be. Once those are identified, you want to consider what the technology is going to be doing to help. So again, back to that goal piece, like what is my goal? How is this technology going to help me reach that goal? What other supports need to be in place? And by supports, that could mean a number of things. Do I need training on a daily basis? Do I need, you know, somebody to help me monthly to practice to learn the technology? What sort of supports need to be in place? Do I need reminders to help me use my assistive technology products? So really taking all supports for the individual that need to be in place and considering that a part of the plan. Technology can't just be placed in an individual's hands and expected to be adopted. And abandonment is at such a high rate for assistive technology that so many components need to be considered when thinking about how to start incorporating technology into an individual's daily life. Last couple things are just, is this goal short-term or long-term for the individual? That's definitely important. I might have a short-term goal in my life that I'd like to reach. Would it make sense for me to try to train on a technology that's going to take me 6 months to learn? If it's just a short-term goal, is there something else out there that will be more helpful and maybe not be as robust that can still help me reach my goal? Long-term, and again, we touched upon this earlier with across the lifespan, is there a tool that I can use for several years and not have to constantly be shifting to use other tools and having to relearn devices if there's something that I can take with me across the lifespan? And how often should the technology be reexamined? And oftentimes this is determined by the team, and I know Daphne will be talking about this a little bit too, but what needs to be considered when I'm making sure that this tool that I'm using is still appropriate and that it's still helping me reach the goal that I had in mind when I adopted that technology. So without delay, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Daphne, who's going to take over for the second portion of our presentation.
That was great. So when it comes to obtaining assistive technology, really the first step is to consider it as a support tool in the first place. So this might seem straightforward, especially since I assume most of you are somewhat comfortable with technology, being that you managed to log into this webinar today. However, in the world of IDD, we should really always be keeping technology in mind as a way to support people, rather than assuming that they need additional assistance from another person, be it a family member or a staff. If you think about all of the things many of us do with just our cell phones, you know, we connect with others, we shop. I think of something I need, and 2 days later it's at my door, thanks to Amazon Prime. You know, we get reminders, we use our GPS. This one device gives you a lot of abilities. So if you think about, you know, taking that one device away, you think about all the ability that you lose there. So, you know, I could probably figure out some other way to get things done, but I guarantee you if I didn't have my phone, like my alarm on my phone to wake me up every morning, I'd be depending on someone else to wake me up. So that one tool really gives me a lot of independence. And I think most of you on here can probably relate to that. So we all know of all the things we couldn't do without our technology, but what we need to find out is what can the people we support do with technology? This is really what I see as the great unknown. When we're supporting people, do we consider how technology could make their lives easier too? There's a quote by a well-known disability rights activist that you can see on your screen here. For most of us, technology makes things easier. For a person with a disability, it makes things possible. And I just think that's a really powerful statement, and that recognizing this is the first step. Next slide, please. So next, keeping technology always in our minds, we can identify those opportunities for independence. These are the tasks that a person often needs support with, their barriers or challenges. This is what will really help you define what you want the technology to help with. On this slide is a list of some different areas technology can support people with, and some examples of common challenges people face that might make them a good candidate for assistive technology. For example, a person might be a good candidate for an adapted telephone if they're unable to use a standard phone because of a hearing impairment, or perhaps they are relying on someone else to dial for them. There are many kinds of phones out there, from amplified phones to help with hearing, and picture phones where a man with difficulty dialing full telephone numbers due to cognition or memory loss can press a picture of the person they want to call to dial them. Or perhaps a person might be a good candidate for assistive technology for communication if they only use nonverbal communication or are difficult to understand with unfamiliar communication partners. You can see lots of other areas on this slide that are sort of the domains that Katie touched on, and in a bit, I'll show you some examples of some ways that AT has helped people we support at the ARC Baltimore with some of these areas. Next. So when is a good time to consider technology and evaluate potential needs for AT? I would say whenever a barrier in one of those areas is identified. So this could be when you observe a person's daily routine and look at if and how they need assistance. For example, do they need someone to turn their TV on for them? Maybe they could use a simpler remote control. Or does someone remind them to take their medications? Or could an alarm be set to remind them instead? Another point in time to look at AT could be in times of transition. For example, maybe a student used a large communication device while in school, but when they graduate, they'll be working in a different setting and may need something more portable. Transition could also mean moving from one job or home to another, or one life phase to another. I could have one job answering phones and move to a new job doing data entry on a computer. I would need two different types of AT to help me complete these tasks. Also, a change in abilities due to illness or injury may warrant AT consideration. Maybe I had surgery and I'm on bed rest, so I could use some remotes for environmental control that I didn't need before, or a caregiver alert. Next, as we all know, aging can be accompanied by its own set of common changes in ability, such as hearing loss, memory loss, all things that AT can help with. But with all the other things going on in a person's life, AT may not always be on their minds, so I would recommend thinking about it as a team at the very least at the time of the annual planning process and/or individual planning meeting. Whether that's prompted by some pre-planning form or process you can build into your organization's practices, or something as a person or family member you can bring to the table to discuss with the team, this is a good time to reflect and also think about the person's goals and how AT could help a person achieve those goals, as Katie touched on earlier. Next slide. So once you've identified an area where you want the AT to help, you're in a position to consider what AT services you may be eligible for based on this area. For example, if you have a need related to overcoming a task at work, your State Department of Vocational Rehab might be able to assist you. If the person is a child in school, the school system could help. Or if you have a need related to telephone access, you can turn to your state's telecommunications equipment distribution program. Also, each state has a technology assistance program that can assist with identifying appropriate AT services, and you'll find more information and links to some of these resources that I'm mentioning at the end of this PowerPoint. Also linked is a guide on how to navigate some of these resources in Maryland that our network at the ARC Baltimore is piloting. So feel free to check that out on the resources slide. Next slide. So with all the technology out there, and we all know there's more and more on the market every single day, how do you know what AT will best meet your needs or those of the person you're supporting? It is important to have an assessment with an experienced AT professional, and also, as Katie touched on, to really assure person-centered thinking through the process. So starting with the person, not the technology. There's this funny saying in the AT world, an iPad is the solution. But wait, what was the question? So it's good, the iPad's great, we're not knocking the iPad, but it's good to consider a wide array of tools, all the way from low to high tech, when looking at a person and their needs. It's also important to consider the environment in which they'll be using the technology. Does it need to be portable? When it comes to assessments, different types of professionals are best suited to assess different types of needs. So, for example, a speech and language pathologist who specializes in augmentative and alternative communication with technology should really be the appropriate person to go to for an AT assessment to meet a communication need. A best practice is to trial the AT in the environment where it will be used, and also to really get authentic input from the team in which tools to even try. So one big tip here to share is to include direct support staff in the entire process from assessment to implementation. They really know the person best and have great input, and if they're invested from the beginning of the process, the implementation will likely be more successful for the person. Next. Okay, so you've had your assessment and you determine what you believe will be the most appropriate AT, and now it's time to implement it. Depending upon the area of need and the services the person is eligible for, funding can be more or less of a challenge. Typically, the AT person who's helping you with device selection will be able to give some guidance on this, or your local tech assistance program. There is a range of public and private and nonprofit organizations that help people who are seeking funding to purchase AT. A few tidbits I can share with you now is that anything that's considered durable medical equipment is typically funded through insurance, so that includes high-tech communication devices as long as they're dedicated to that purpose. Maryland's DD waiver also allows for funding of AT devices and services, and as I touched on before, if school or voc rehab is involved, they can usually assist. So you can see why it's important to begin the AT exploration process based on the area or domain you plan to address, so that later when you need the funding, you've kind of followed the correct channels in order to obtain the funding. So once you have the device, it will need to be set up for the person. And depending on the type of device, you might need more or less assistance with this. But the person and their team should definitely be trained. So one practice we have here at the ARC Baltimore is that we make training videos of a person using their device and an AT professional explaining how it works and also modeling how to best support the person. We've found this to be a great tool for training and one that's really needed in a world where there's a lot of turnover in staff. I also really try and encourage staff and family to play with the devices themselves so they feel more comfortable, since in most cases they really do play a huge role in providing ongoing training to the person. Next slide. So once you have the device and people are trained, the team can continue to monitor how it's going and reassess needs over time. So as a person changes, their needs may change and they may need something different, and you may need to start the whole AT cycle over again. The team could establish a monitoring mechanism that makes the most sense for the person. So this could be as in-depth as a data sheet tracking, what different prompt types the support person is giving, so that you can kind of look at how the individual is progressing over time. But it could also be as simple as a monthly visit to see how it's going. So think about what you can put in place to assure follow-up and follow-through with the initial recommendations. One way to build in a monitoring mechanism is to integrate it into the IP goals, which are typically already in essence monitoring throughout the IP year. So one example, I'm calling my sister twice a week using my picture phone. We recommend this practice particularly during the training phase where a person is still learning to use the device. And again, it's just the technology integrated into the larger goal that the person wants to accomplish. So the goal is not, I'm using my assistive technology, it's, I'm calling my sister using my assistive technology. Next slide. Okay, so these next few slides are some highlights of people that we support at the ARC Baltimore and how they've been able to use AT to overcome some different barriers. So here's Don. Don is not always motivated to wake up and shower for the day. So he has a talking alarm clock, and it goes off in the morning, and he hears his girlfriend's voice waking him up, reminding him to wake up, take a shower, so you look good for me, my love. So the team input, this was actually a lot of fun, and the team input was really important here because it was their idea to put the girlfriend's voice on there because they knew that that would be motivating for him. And it was really brilliant. And so this class also reminds him to take his medications and complete household chores. But I just think that that's such a fun and effective application of a pretty low-tech device for this guy, Don, here. Next. Okay, this is Keith. I love this picture and his smile here. He's very happy because he's talking to his girlfriend with his hands-free phone. So the staff actually used to hold the phone to his ear for like hours, or they placed it on top of a pile of pillows and he would just kind of lean his head over onto the phone, so because he's not able to hold a standard phone to his ear. So now he can chat for hours in privacy, and staff can, tend to some other things that they need to take care of while they're working. And so here you have a $10 solution that brought him an immense amount of independence and happiness. And I like this story because it also shows how AT can make a staff's job easier too. Next slide. Okay, this is Mary Ruth. She is very difficult to understand if you don't know her well, and like a lot of people, you can imagine she gets frustrated if people are, she really is trying to tell you something and it's hard for us to understand her. So she has a lot to say, and now she has a small wearable communication device called a NovaChat 5, which we got funded through her insurance, and she's so happy that she can make people understand her with the push of a button. Here she is announcing herself before going into the men's room to clean it, which is something she used to need a job coach to do with her. but now she can do it herself using her technology. Next slide. Here is Leon. Leon was having a hard time remembering to bring his lunch to work every day, so his team was actually he had people calling him every morning because he didn't have support at home in the morning in person, and they considered AT, and we got him this little voice cue device, which he gets a voice reminder to bring his lunch to work, and he got something portable because there's also, we discovered some reminders that he can use throughout the day, so it's kind of like a pager that he gets, voice reminders when he needs them for different tasks. Next slide. All right, this is Steph. He is our AT All-Star. This slide has a list of some of the assistive technology he uses and some of the things that he has to say about it. There's also a link, which you can watch later on, of him taking you on a tour of his apartment. So if you're interested in kind of seeing what he uses and how he uses it, I would recommend you take a couple minutes to watch that. It's pretty cool. He's legally blind and has an array of AT to help him. So everything from magnifiers, Zoom text, which Katie touched on, which helps him with his computer, to some very low-tech daily living aids to help him around his house. In fact, one of his favorite items is very low-tech. It's a pot watcher. It's a small glass disc that he puts in his pot on the stove with water in it, and it shakes to make a noise when the water is boiling to alert him that the water is boiling, which is difficult for him to see with his vision. So again, I encourage you to check out this video, but I just love these quotes from Seth, and really he gets down to, without this AT, I wouldn't be able to be as independent as I am today. So that just shows you the world of possibilities when it comes to connecting people with tools to be independent. Next. So while the hope is that technology will make things easier for people, there are definitely some challenges that we face of all different kinds. So there are challenges in design. You have to be person-centered. So an app designer can't design an app for autism and presume it will be the best match for every single person with autism. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Cost can be a challenge if you haven't connected with the right funding source, or perhaps there's a funding gap. People are not always aware of technology resources available in the community, and it can be a challenge to facilitate skill building. To use some of the lesser intuitive applications, whether that's an app or some sort of software. There's this idea of digital natives and digital immigrants, coined by Dr. Ofer Zur and Aziz Zur. These are there are people who don't know a world without internet, Facebook, Twitter. These are digital natives. So these are your transitioning youth. They're native to the land that we live in now, which is the world of technology. Digital immigrants, on the other hand, have known a world without all the latest and greatest technology. Maybe they haven't embraced technology and don't want to get on Facebook or get a smartphone. In times where people in support roles to tech users, so parents, staff, teachers, in times where those people fall into the category of digital immigrant, this can be a challenge. How can they support and teach technology if they don't speak the language themselves? They can, but it takes a lot of effort and willingness on their part, and training and time. Mobility of the technology. So if you have a very heavy device at home that works for you, but you need something at work, carrying it back and forth, maybe you need to reconsider and evaluate your tools that you're using there. Also, in terms of getting the device from place to place, even if it is portable, just remembering to bring it. So Katie talked about those supports that people might need. For people who rely on staff to help them get ready for the day, I try to compare a communication device to a wheelchair, glasses, or a hearing aid. They can't get through their day without it. So kind of making that message clear and identifying the key people who are going to just at least make sure that they have access to their device when they need it. Turnover in staff support. This is a challenge for many things. especially technology. So maybe you have a new staff who wasn't part of the AT process. They may not be as bought into, you know, helping a person with it and kind of sticking through the challenges with that. And then finally, a significant challenge is the need for many people to shift from this caregiving model to a model where we promote independence and empowerment with the right tools. So this can be a challenge to even considering technology in the first place if we have, you know, if we're wired to do things for people instead of doing things with people or supporting people in doing things for themselves. Next slide. Some more general challenges here. With technology constantly changing, how can we possibly stay on top of it? So some recommendations would be to look out for classes or training programs. Chapters of the ARC may have programs and staff to help you with this. There are lots of AT blogs out there on Twitter, lots of groups that you can join even on Facebook, and Pinterest is a great resource, like if you just want to look at, you know, communication boards and see everything that pops up. It's kind of neat. And then your statewide technology assistance program is a great resource. Here in Maryland, our tech program has a huge library where people can go and tour just to kind of get an idea of what's out there if they're just looking to learn more about AT. And they can share resources to kind of connect you with the right chain to follow to get those needs met. Next slide. At the person level, a person with IDD can talk with their team and bring up technology as an option. So if you think about as an individual with disabilities, is there one person on your team who's in charge of looking at different ideas with you? If not, maybe you can identify someone and ask them to go with you to check out your statewide technology assistance program and learn more about it. Perhaps they would be a person to help you test or learn how to use different kinds of apps. Consider that finding new technology or a new solution takes patience, and with that said, make sure to give a solution time to work and then evaluate it. So not just throwing in the towel on something that, you know, was recommended like a week after because it's not working out right away. Keep in mind, I feel like we just keep saying this, but sometimes a low-tech solution is best, and build in time to consider new technology when you update your plan each year. One exercise could be to maybe list out the things that someone does with you and or for you and look at why. So consider technology for some of these things. Reminders are often a good thing to consider, in addition to, you know, using the phone, controlling your environment, and those sorts of things. And then building in some time to learn about technology and keep you up to date with your tech skills is also a good practice. All right, next slide. So as professionals, here are some challenges that we see. Sometimes we're training people who don't have experience with any technology to learn new skills. So this includes the tech users as well as their support network of family and staff. I've touched on that a bit, but I want to give you some ideas on how you can overcome that. So I find that when you focus on the outcome rather than the technicality of the device that may intimidate people, that people are more receptive. So for example, you are helping John communicate versus you are helping him use his NovaChat. You know, focusing on the outcome and a person's role in supporting the outcome versus you need to know how to program this device and all of the nuts and bolts. Supporting people to utilize assistive technology tools can be a challenge, so encourage them to try new things to achieve a better solution, and again, focus on that outcome. Katie touched on abandonment. So device abandonment is a common challenge with AT users. I think the latest statistic is that 1 in every 3 AT devices are abandoned. So this could be because the device is lost, maybe there was a lack of training, or maybe it just wasn't set up to meet a person's needs. So this can be for a number of reasons, but that is a challenge. So those sort of factors that can contribute to that, you want to try to address early on in the process. And then support professionals, caregivers, and family members must see the value in the tool and support usage. So I like to emphasize this early on in training and really work as a team, hearing and addressing concerns as they come up so that everyone really feels comfortable and also empowered and supported in implementing the assistive technology. All right, so next slide, and I'm going to hand it back to Katie.
Giving you a virtual high five, Daphne. Awesome work. So right now, here's just a list of some of the resources that Daphne and I compiled that we wanted to share with everyone. So the first is Assistive Technology Industry Association, so there's a funding guide available there. The Association for Assistive Technology ACT programs. The listing of the statewide telecommunications equipment distribution program. Also some more information from the ARC Baltimore and a full AT guide available right there for you. And then lastly, a couple links to some sites that the ARC National has developed. The first being the Tech Toolbox, which is a search engine for different assistive technologies. It's crowdsourced, so people can go in and post their favorite technologies and share stories of success. They can also share stories of maybe a device that didn't work for them so that people can check those out and see if there's anything in that inventory of tools that may match up to the goals that they're hoping to achieve. And then that second site is still under construction, but I did want to share it with everyone. It is a tech coaching resource site. Basically, I've been working on a handful of projects here at the ARC National, and we're hoping to merge all of the projects that we've been working on and put them all on one site. Some of you may or may not be familiar with online tech coaching that we've worked on in addition to the Tech Toolbox and the tech coaching centers through Comcast NBC that we've worked on as well, all focused on bettering the technology skills of individuals with IDD within the chapter network. So I do also want to add, before we open up to questions, that we will be happy to send this PowerPoint presentation out so you guys can use this as a resource. If you want to share this with others, that's completely cool with us. But go ahead and feel free to ask questions in the chat box, and I'll have Jenny and Abby field those to Daphne and I as they come.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Daphne. As Katie prompted, if you have any questions for the presenters, please leave them in the chat box on the right side of your screen. We'll make sure that we get them to the presenters. If you think of something after the fact, you will be getting the PowerPoint slides and a copy of the webinar presentation, the recording of the webinar presentation after this meeting, very likely tomorrow, because it takes some time to get that recording. So please keep an eye out for that, and please feel free to ask questions if you have them after this presentation. So I did have one question while we're waiting for some of the questions from the audience. You guys had mentioned the importance of training everybody around a person and dealing with issues that arise when there is staff turnover. Perhaps there is challenges kind of getting everybody on board with the outcome and the piece of assistive technology. Do you guys have any strategies that you would recommend to family members or professionals who are kind of working on getting the whole team on board and trained and kind of keeping that training up to date for everyone?
Yeah, so I can chime in on that. A lot of times, just kind of a matter of getting the team together and looking at, you know, having a frank conversation about like what the person's goals are, and then, you know, hearing people on the team about what their concerns may be, and learning more about, you know, what what lies there. So, like, a common thing that I hear is that, you know, maybe from a family member, for example, like, well, you know, I'm just worried that the device will walk away. Like, it's an expensive device, you know. And so you could say, well, you know, and then with the team together, then the team can kind of say, well, here's how we can manage that. You know, I can be responsible for it and make sure that he has it when he gets on the van. And then, you know, if he comes home without it, you just call me right away. So really sort of working through on the person level at the team level is important. Also, a common misconception is that when people think of technology, they think money. It's too expensive, I don't even want to think about it, you know. But if you have, you know, if you're at the table saying, like, well, there are a lot of resources out there and maybe it won't cost you anything, like, can we just look into it? So I think when you consider technology, not committing to any solution, just like kind of working through that process and learning as you go has been helpful. When it comes to staff training, like, trying to integrate AT into any of your practices related to training. So if it's in someone's IP goal and part of their training that, you know, staff is receiving when they come on board with that person, then it should be something that the staff is trained on, you know, at that time. So, like, we've tried to kind of work that and other things into our processes here at the ARC Baltimore to assure that, you know, everyone is trained and that everyone is on the same page about, you know, what the AT is there to really support a person with.
I'll also chime in just to add to that. I agree with everything that Daphne said. I also would ask for the team to really consider what environments the technology is meant to be incorporated into, if not all environments. Because there are certain individuals and devices that it may only be used while cooking or while in transit independently, or maybe while I'm at work. And I know Daphne did touch upon that. So figuring out what environments that tool absolutely needs to be incorporated is important so that everybody's on the same page. And the thing I think of are the DSPs in the home environment, or if the individual is living with their family, the family is going to need to understand when that tool should be used and how it should be used. So all of the players that are part of that individual's life should really be at the table to understand the purpose of the tool, how it needs to be incorporated. And then also one thing that I've done in the past is lots of coaching, and not just coaching with, for the individual to learn the device, but coaching for the individuals that will be working with the person with IDD to use that device. If I'm working on an individual learning how to use an augmentative communication device across all environments, I might have the DSP go on a shopping trip with me so that we can practice together using that device. That might not be the first time that I'm incorporating that device, but that's certainly an opportunity for both the individual with IDD who's learning the device and the support person, whether it be family member or DSP, to also be able to practice using the device in real-life situations. Daphne had touched upon having video guides. I definitely agree with that. Having materials that are up to date and ready to be disseminated to new support staff members as they come into that individual's life is important, because it can be a lot if you're having to do. I mean, I know Daphne oversees the program at the ARC Baltimore, but she can't do trainings constantly if there's at the rate of the turnover potentially taking place. So it's nice to always have that. Also, just to refresh when you need it. Also, I did want to add one last thing, which would be don't fear the unknown. And again, we did touch upon, individuals being fearful of losing devices or breaking devices or having devices stolen. I would advise for people to take the risk of losing a device or breaking a device in order to potentially meet a goal. At the end of the day, you know, if a device is lost, stolen, broken, whatever it may be, it's not the end of the world. And most of the time, you're going to be surrounded by people who are understanding of that. So.
Thank you, Daphne, and thank you, Katie. I had one more question, and that kind of gets into the great unknown. One of the important parts of future planning is figuring out kind of how to make sure that the person and the family and the people surrounding them are kind of prepared for whatever changes might come, and kind of to address and make amendments as challenges might arise, as new goals might arise. But we also know that technology is constantly changing, and Katie, you showed the immense changes in AT throughout the years. Are there recommendations that you would make to a person and their family about kind of what they should include in a future planning guide or as goals to kind of make sure that they're ready for any changes in technology or any new opportunities that might arise, not only this year but in the future for several years?
I think, this is Daphne here, I think it's good practice to, like in future planning, as you're talking about what you see happening in your future, to consider certainly assistive technology in that conversation. So if you see, I want to live in my own apartment, then think about what you may need in order to do that. And sometimes it's helpful to, gain access to that technology before you really need it, so that when you need it, you're more comfortable with it. So if, there are certain things that you may need to live on your own, it might be a good idea to, start getting your hands on some of those things and exploring them, so that you and your team are more comfortable. And also thinking about, like with that example, if someone is going from maybe living with their family to living in their own apartment, thinking about like, what are those safety concerns? We talked, I think safety was on one of the slides, but and how can we address them with technology? So, if a person doesn't know how to dial 911, maybe they could achieve that with, an adaptive telephone. Or maybe if they are walking away from the stove or have some concerns around cooking, they could get like a stove shutoff device. So really just always keeping AT in mind. And you don't have to be an AT expert. Just keep in mind and go to the resources, like your AT professionals and your tech assistance program, to sort of just always keep it in mind and look at how it can help.
And I agree with everything that Daphne said, and honestly, I don't have too much more to add, just really that, at least on an annual basis, make sure that it comes up as a part of the conversation. If not, as you run into challenges with, trying to accomplish goals or independence, most certainly always consider it to be something that needs to be incorporated into the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Sorry for that. Thank you all, and thank you to everybody for attending this presentation today. Thank you, Katie and Daphne, for presenting this information. If you have any questions that you think of after, Katie and Daphne's email is on the screen. You can also respond back when we send you the PowerPoint and the webinar recording, and we can make sure your questions get connected with the speakers. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us, and we will hope to see you again on our next future planning webinar.